generation is all the people born or living at about the same time. Another way it's defined as the average period generally considered to be about 20 or 25 years, during which children are born and grow up, become adults, and begin to have their own children. So a generation is the time, like it says, from the time you're born till the time that you're having children. That's usually considered a generation. Now it doesn't always, there's also like historical generations, like for example the baby boomers. Y'all probably heard about baby boomers. Those are people that were born from 1946, to 1965. That's what's generally considered baby boomers. And these are people that grew up at the time when TV came out, and so they started, before then, they didn't see a lot of what was around the world around them, and so they were more isolated. But in that time period for baby boomers, and it was after World War II also, people that grew up after World War II, and so there's a generation, and they have certain characteristics, and there's certain things about people living at a certain time that make them different maybe than other younger or older groups. The next one to come out was they called Generation X, and it was 1966 to 1980. And this was the generation that grew up when computers were invented. Computers started to change so much in the world, from the development of all kind of, for cars changing and work, businesses, all kind of things changed because of the invention of the computer. And these people were all living in this period. Then next came the millennials. This is from 1981 to 96. And this was during the time of the internet explosion. And these people grew up, were at the time that the internet was being introduced to people. And of course it changed, how much it changed our world. And then there's what they call Gen Z, which are 1997 to the present. That's most of you guys in here would be Gen Zers. And they're all different, every group's different. And the millennials, they say the millennials, they were between 5 and 20 at the time of the September 11th attacks on the Twin Towers. And because they saw that, and because they were alive during that time and experienced that, it changed that whole generation, because their view of the world and about how people began to worry about being attacked from outside. This is also the time we had the Iraq wars and Afghanistan and all these things. And so it changed people, and that generation itself was different because of the events that happened. And so they were different. Gen Z people, you people, are ones who grew up and have little or no knowledge or even remembrance of the 9/11. You've always heard about 9/11, but you didn't experience it, and so it didn't shape how you think or how you are. So there's, like I said, each one's different. The one thing about Gen Z people, like you guys, is y'all grown up, like I said, there was baby boomers, there was TV, then there was the internet or computers, and then internet. Well, you guys have grown up in a time when that's been normal. It's all been a part of your life since you were born, and you don't know anything different. Social media and constantly being connected with everybody else, and on-demand communication and entertainment, all these things are things that y'all take for granted because that's what y'all grew up with. And to us that grew up were born at a different time, it's not the same for us. From the creation of man, from the time God created man, up until, say, before the time of the baby boomers, there was not that much change compared to what there has been since then. The changes occurred so rapidly since then. I've been thinking about jokes to make about Grandy because she was born before the baby boomers, and saying that she was the same as Abraham's time or whatever, And I said, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to make those kind of jokes. Up until the time of the baby boomers, when things started changing a lot, everything centered around the family. Your family was the biggest influence in everybody's life. People worked hard to build a good life for themselves and for their families. people believed in right and wrong. There was a lot more stronger, I guess you'd say, convictions or whatever. People believed this was wrong and you didn't do it, this is right, and you could do it. And people were not particularly rebellious against the system in which they lived. I mean, there were some instances over history where people rebelled against the government, but in general, people weren't, whatever country they lived in, whatever system they lived in, they lived under that, and they abided by the rules, obeyed the rules, and worked hard for themselves and their families. And they, I guess like they say, they kept their nose to the grindstone, and they worked and tried to build something for themselves and their family. Whatever God people believed in, whether it was Christians or Muslims or whatever it was, they were for the most part faithful to their religion. It was a part of their family. It was a part of their family life, and they believed that it was important. And they raised their kids in it, and their kids most of the time grew up in the same faith, believing the same way their parents did. And so throughout history, before TV and internet and social media, families passed along the knowledge, culture, history through their families. They by telling stories, by kids being a part of what their families were doing, and seeing how their families did things, and understanding, learning, and they were a part of it. And so the values of family were passed from one generation to the next. That's how things got passed down. And there were a few other influences on children's lives outside of the family. In a few short generations, though, like I said, from the time of the baby boomers to now, in a few short generations, the family has fallen far behind the internet and social media and entertainment in shaping what a child's beliefs are and their values are. I want to read a few verses here out of Psalms. Turn to Psalm 145. Psalm 145, and I'll start with verse 1. And it says, I will extol thee, my God, O King, and I will bless thy name forever and ever. Every day will I bless thee, and I will praise thy name forever and ever. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. One generation shall praise thy works to another, and shall declare thy mighty acts. I will speak of the glorious honor of thy majesty, and of thy wondrous works. And men shall speak of the might of thy terrible acts, and I will declare thy greatness. They shall abundantly utter the memory of thy great goodness, and shall sing of thy righteousness. Amen. So we'll stop there. David here is talking, he wrote this song, and he's talking about how he's going to make sure that those around him and those that come and follow him are going to know how good his God is. And how good his God has been to him. And he wanted everybody to know that. He wanted to pass that on to everybody else. He said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to praise God. And I'm going to extol my God, my King. And I'm going to make sure I do that. And then it says, he says in verse number 4, and I'll read it again. It says, one generation shall praise thy works to another, and shall declare thy mighty acts. And so this is the verse that struck me as I was reading this. And so I went and I looked at a lot of different things, and a lot of people look at it in a different way, because you can look at it. There was 3 different ways that I saw that people look at it in different ways. The first way that people have understood this verse is that it was a prediction that has been fulfilled and is being fulfilled. Now this was written by David some 4,000 years ago. And so the fact that we're here today and is evidence that God, that this was a prediction that people shall pass on this in for this knowledge of him. Because he said, God said through David, one generation shall praise thy works to another, and shall declare thy mighty acts. So it's proof that we're here today and still have this God's word, that is true, that's what God did. He was predicting that it's going to be passed down from generation to generation. And the generations that have come before us have preserved the truth. They've preserved the truth, and it's come down to us. So it was a prediction in that sense. It was David saying that they're going to praise you, and they're going to declare thy mighty acts from one generation to the other. It was a prediction, and it is true. And second, people say that it's like a promise. Where would we be now if God hadn't made sure that the knowledge of his unsearchable greatness had made it to us? Amen. You know, if he hadn't have made sure that we got it, even if we inherited wealth, power, earthly greatness, glory, if we had inherited all these things, and then that those who had been before us had been unfaithful to pass down the knowledge of God to us, what that would be like to us now. We could have everything, but if they had failed to pass it down to us, then we'd lose everything. We would have nothing. In the end, no matter what we gained in this world, if we didn't have the knowledge of God, the knowledge of his salvation, the knowledge of Jesus coming, if that hadn't come down to us, then we'd have nothing. At the end of our lives, it'd be over, and we'd lose whatever we might have gained in this life. Because those things are going to burn up with everything else. All the wealth and things that you might have had, power, whatever it might have been, are going to burn up. But thank God that we can look at this as a promise, because God said it shall be passed down. So in the way you can read it that way, it shall be passed down. And God's saying, I'm going to make sure this happens. When Jesus went into Jerusalem on his way to Calvary, the crowds were praising him and saying, blessed be the King. And some of the Pharisees told Jesus, tell your people to stop praising you, making so much noise. And Jesus told them, I tell you that if these should hold their peace, the stones would immediately cry out. Yeah. So Jesus is saying, this is going to be told. They're going to talk about me. It's going to go out. Even if these people right here shut up, somebody else is going to do it. The rocks will do it if somebody has to. Yeah. And so God made sure this message was going to get out. So it was a promise. Here he was saying, it shall be done. I read somewhere where somebody said, and I had to listen to it because it was all written a long time ago, so it's hard to understand maybe exactly. It says, there may be sad unfaithfulness here and there, and sore suffering must ensue. But God will not suffer himself to want for faithful witnesses who shall transmit that knowledge of himself, which is life eternal, to the generation that receiveth it. He's saying here that there's going to be some people that don't pass it on. There's going to be some people who fail to do what they ought to do, and that's going to bring hard times on them maybe. But God's going to make sure. He said he'll not suffer himself to want for faithful witnesses. That means he's going to make sure there are witnesses that will tell the next generation that will receive it. So God's promise is he'll make sure that every generation knows of him. But as this guy said, as long as the next generation receives it. Like I said, every generation, since the baby boomers, okay, every generation that's come since then has been less and less passed down the knowledge of God to their families. It's getting less and less. So if it's true, this guy says, that God's going to pass this down to every generation that will receive it, there's going to come a time where people are not receiving it anymore. And it's every generation is getting less and less, and it's going to come a time where people aren't going to receive it, and that's going to be the end of God passing that down. He's going to come back, and this grace period that we're in right now, where we have a chance to understand and receive salvation and receive that grace that there is, That's going to come to an end, because there's going to become a time where people are not receiving it. Now, they may, at the last moment, when Jesus comes back, they might cry out, and he's going to say, I never knew you. You had the chance. You knew about me. You were told about me. You didn't receive me. But for right now, there is a chance. Right now, we have a chance to pass this down from our generation to you guys, to your generation, and you can pass it down even further. Because the third way to look at this verse is that, yes, it's a prediction, and yes, it's a promise, but it's also a commandment that each generation is supposed to observe diligently. First of all, it's a commandment to all people. So it's a general commandment that says we as a people should pass down the knowledge of God to the people that come after us. Because if we don't, heaven help future generations. So it's something that we ought to do as Christians, ought to do as people. Because you only have to look 5 minutes at the news, or on the internet, or at the TV, at what's on TV, to see that the devil is getting his message out. The devil is working hard to get his message across to people, and every day it seems more and more that he's spreading his message out to the people. And his message is that he's telling you guys, now that, like I said, now that the influence of the devil is so strong in this world, he's telling y'all either God doesn't exist, or that it doesn't really matter that much to y'all. It's not something you don't have to really worry about, or think about, or care about. There's always other things to care about. He's telling us that the Bible's not true. He's telling us that it doesn't matter how God created us, that it's up to us. We can choose to do and be however we want to, and do whatever we want to do, without regard for anything other than our own pleasure and our own entertainment. He said that that's what the devil wants to tell you, that it doesn't matter. Anything about God doesn't matter. What matters really is that you enjoy yourself and you have a good time. And that's what the devil's in business to do. So it's up to the people of our generation that know God to tell them and to keep those of us that know about His love and His salvation and His power and His greatness and His goodness. Those of us that know that, it's up to us to continue to pass it on to the next generation, to fight against this tidal wave of lies and deceit that's coming from the devil and from this world, because we're the only ones really that stand between going to hell for our kids and for the next generation, and because, like I said, the devil's winning this war for the hearts and souls of our kids. But it's not only a commandment to us as a people, as Christians, as a nation or whatever. It's not only a commandment to us, it's also a commandment, a specific commandment to us as a church and us as parents. In Proverbs it says, in Proverbs 22 it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not depart from it. Amen. The things that we teach our children are the things that they're going to have when they're older. So if they're going to have something in their generation, it's up to us to teach it to them. It's up to us to get it to them. If we teach them the mighty works of God and the great salvation that's available to them, if we teach them that God does hear and answer their prayers, if we teach them that He does protect and watch out for His children and provide for them, these things they're going to have in their lives. These are the things they're going to be able to carry into their lives. But if we don't teach them that or show them that, they're not going to have it, because it's up to us to get it to them. Of course, it's important for the gospel to go out into the whole world. That's what God told the disciples. That's what the Great Commission is, for us to spread the gospel to the whole world. But isn't it, which is important, and I'm sure it's important to all of us, but isn't it more important that it be our kids? Isn't it more important? Isn't that what's, if you had to rate everything? Would you say, okay, I want to get everybody saved, but I really want to get my kids saved.
Right.
I really want to get, I want to get it to them. And so it's most important for us to get this message to our kids and get our kids to understand it, because you know we can pass it on to a lot of people, and we should try to, but who is going to be happy that you pass the message on and your own kids went to hell? That's not, you know, that's not going to be, nobody's going to feel good about that.
No.
So we're supposed to train and teach our kids. But to train and teach means that it's not just on us, because there's two involved. In order to train or teach somebody, there has to be two of you. One's the teacher and one's the student, or one's the one that's being taught. I can't teach Kratos to wash my car. I wish I could, because he'd probably do it. But I can't teach him to do that. And Aries, there's no way he can understand or learn about the greatness of God and how good God is. He can't do that, but our kids can learn that.
Yes.
They can. And there's, like I said, there's two of us. There's us and y'all. And y'all are able to learn these things. Y'all are able to learn the things that we try to preach and teach in each time we get up here in church, and every service we have. Y'all are able to learn these things. And that's why we get up here and repeat so many times these things, because we want y'all to understand it. We want y'all to learn it. We want y'all to take it into your hearts. Because these are the things that you're going to need for the later in your life, for the rest of your life. And if you're not saved, I mean, it's tragic if you don't get it, if you don't learn them. But that's why we try to do this. Because these things that we have and we know